Hey, I want to speak a bit about the boxer Muhammad Ali, who really needs no introduction. Almost certainly the most famous boxer ever. Um, famous to non-boxing fans as well. For a variety of reasons. One is incredible athleticism, his abilities in the ring, the fact that he was incredibly political outside the ring, his flamboyance and all the rest of it. For all those reasons, he is almost certainly the most famous boxer ever. Um, I'm aware that he's getting on now. He's in his early 70s, and the Parkinson's is certainly having its effect. And I don't mean to say that in a crass way. I'm just saying it as it is. Um, so I sympathise with him in that regard. It's although he once said himself he doesn't want people to feel sorry for him. He is who he is, and I admire that actually. He's never sort of had self pity in that regard. So that's something I do respect. I'll say that off the top. I respect that fact. Um, but when it comes to the point where he does pass away, I think we're going to see a massive amount of kind of blind adulation. And if I make this video at that time, it will absolutely be shut down, as it will probably now. But I do think that I've always been someone who has spoken my mind, whether it's popular or not. And that applies as much to my views on Muhammad Ali as anyone. There's a tendency, especially in the boxing world, for people to basically blindly praise Ali just for the sake of it. I remember once Carl Froch said he wasn't a big fan of Ali's style. He didn't even mention politics or anything like that. And he was immediately pounced on and slated and, called all the names under the sun. And the thing is, he wasn't insulting Ali. He was just saying he wasn't a huge fan, that's all. And in the world of boxing, it's almost blasphemy to say anything against Ali whatsoever. So Muhammad Ali is sort of the boxing equivalent of the King of Thailand. That is to say, he's treated as if he is completely above reproach. Um, I can't think of any other fighter that is venerated in the same way. Some Mike Tyson fans can be quite brainwashed in that sense, and probably in his day. Well, no, actually, I can't think of any other fighter. I guess some Italian Americans would be a bit sycophantic or at least blindly adulate Marciano in a similar way. But I don't think any fighter comes close to the level in which he's just worshipped. And I think that's problematic. Um, the critiques I want to lay out in this video have nothing to do with Ali as a fighter because I think there's no real dispute about that. Even people who don't like Ali, um, you would never take away the fact that he was an outstanding, exceptional athlete. I mean, for a heavyweight, he had incredible speed. The phrase "flies like a butterfly, stings like a bee" was very apt. He fought like a much lighter man. He was an incredible boxer. Not perfect, no boxer is, but he had his losses. But he was an outstanding heavyweight and very possibly the greatest heavyweight ever. The only the only guy possibly that could also claim that is Joe Louis, but Ali was exceptional. So this video's got nothing to do with his ability as a fighter. I thought he fought too long, but that's, a lot of fighters make that mistake. Um, Rather, I want to talk about the thing I mentioned before, which is this blind adulation of him as a person. When I see comments like Muhammad Ali was such a gracious, polite, humble man, not only are those things not true, um, it just demonstrates this sort of blind on thinking adulation of him. Here's the thing, there's boxers in the world today I have a huge amount of respect for, like Manny Pacquiao, Vladimir Klitschko. They'd be two prominent examples. But I would never say that Klitschko or Pacquiao are above criticism as people, because they're not. And to cite an example of that, for example, I think sometimes Pacquiao's evangelizing can be a little bit annoying. Um, as for Klitschko, well, you know, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but the point is, He's not perfect. And anyone criticizing Klitschko with fair critique, I would say, I wouldn't try to silence him and say, call them names and that sort of thing if they were doing it respectfully. Now, I'm not talking here about genuinely racist statements against Ali, the M word and that sort of thing. And there will no doubt be white supremacists out there who have genuinely racist attitudes about him. The problem I have with this is anyone who says anything against Ali is immediately denounced. There's no objectivity whatsoever. Um, and the people doing that aren't really paying attention to what the critique is. And I'm going to lay out some of the critique. Firstly, he does have problematic views on race. There's no escaping this fact. Um, Now, the caveat to this is always, well, you need to think of the time in which he was speaking, i.e., the 60s and the 70s, when the civil rights movement was going on, when there was a rise of black power movements, and when there was certainly a huge amount of racism around. There's no question about it. Ali was growing up at a time where there was deeply entrenched white racism, no question about that. For example, when he won his Olympic medal after the Rome Olympics, he threw it in the Mississippi because he was so frustrated. I've no doubt about it that he felt personal suffering, personal slights from white racism. I've no doubt in my mind about that at all. But here's the thing. He was heavyweight champion of the world. He could have united races. He could have been almost like the Martin Luther King of boxing. No, I'm not saying subservient. I'm not saying quiet. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that Ali could have used his power and his influence to unite people at that time. I'm not talking about today. I'll come to that in a minute. I'm talking about the time where a lot of these videos surfaced from the 60s and 70s. The fact of the matter is, he held black supremacist views. Now, Ali's attitude to everything was based on race. If you look at all the interviews from that time, his entire logic is white people this, white people that. He made no attempt to differentiate between, for example, white civil rights marchers and white racists. In Ali's mind, they're all the same. Um, and in his view, all black people were noble, perfect people. These are racist views, and there's no escaping that fact. And I don't really accept the argument that because it's a response to one kind of racism, that justifies another kind of racism. Muhammad Ali was a free thinking man. He's entirely responsible for his own views. And in my opinion, he was a lot more divisive in the 60s and 70s than uniting. This is something people forget. He's adulated today, but in those days, and it wasn't. I don't think it was just a case of extreme right wing Republicans didn't like him. I think he polarized a lot of people, including probably a lot of Black Americans. So this idea that he was a uniting figure is beyond rubbish. I mean, he was attacking white people at a time when white people um, were included in the civil rights march, and some of them, by the way, were taking personal risks to do so. Several were murdered, in fact. So I don't really accept the argument of the context because there was other black figures at the time who didn't take that approach. Um, and as far as I can tell, and I will take this back if I can, if I see something that contradicts this, as far as I know, he's never ever recanted his views. Look at his attitude to mixed relations. He believed that people should stick with their own. So he was actually creating problems for black men and black women who wanted to marry with white people by saying that they were race traitors, essentially. These are all very, very negligible views. And as someone who's been in mixed relations, I do take that personally. People say, oh, he's entitled to his view. But if you're going to make that sort of view, then it is going to attract controversy. I saw him make an analogy with this. I think it was with David Frost. It may have been another well-known British broadcaster. I can't quite recall. I think it was David Frost. But the response from the British interviewer was that's a very bleak world outlook. That is this idea of dividing people, this sort of tribalist mentality that Ali blatantly had in those days. Blacks stick to blacks, white sticks to white, Asians stick to Asians. That was Ali's view, and there's no escaping that that was his view. And his supporters really have nothing to say to that. Um, there's other problematic areas in the way he treated his opponents. Um, now, people will say that was to hype up fights, and I suspect a lot of it was, but there was definitely many times Ali crossed the line. I mean, he called Joe Frazier an Uncle Tom, which in the black community is like cursing your ancestors. It's utterly, especially given that Joe Frazier, unless I'm mistaken, came from a much more deprived background than Ali did. Ali was from a middle class background. Joe Frazier was working class. So for him to call Joe Frazier an Uncle Tom, especially when Frazier was trying his best to make, to defend Ali when he was stripped of his title, did Frazier gloat? Did he sort of call Ali a traitor to America or anything like that? No. That's how Ali repaid him. He done it with plenty of other fighters. Some of his humiliation against Sonny Liston went way too far. The people say it was in good nature, maybe it was. But Ali basically popularized trash talking in this sport. And I think it's a bit inconsistent for people to criticize fighters doing it today and then praise Ali when they forget the fact that Ali basically popularized that. And in my opinion, it's don't get me wrong, I'm not square. I see nothing wrong with popularizing, like hyping up fights. I get that, and it is true that Ali's era saw some of the greatest fights ever. Thriller Manila, Rumble in the Jungle, and so on. But even take for example the Rumble in the Jungle, he encouraged Congolese crowds to shout, "Ali, kill him." He openly encouraged, even knowing what it meant, he openly encouraged the crowds to shout that. And George Foreman showed guts of steel to face that. Foreman, in the documentary We Were Kings, he made the mistake of turning up with a German Shepherd, and that was a symbol of Belgian colonialism. But he certainly didn't deserve the vitriol that he went through leading up to that fight. Um, I think a lot of it was bravado to mask fear. There's no shame in that. No shame in any fighter feeling fear. But people forget that Ali, you know, when people criticize Derek Chisora or Shannon Briggs or other big mouths in the sport, they forget that it was Ali that really started that. Okay, you could say Jack Johnson started it in a way as well, but Ali really popularized that style. I get that it was a counter to Joe Lewis's expected sort of subservience to the white establishment at that time, but I still contend that Ali went way too far with some of his opponents. Not all of them. Some of it was good-natured, but I do think, for example, with Joe Frazier, he went too far. Um, Now, before people think I'm just hating, like I'm doing the reverse of what I'm accusing others of, Ali has plenty of good points. I don't actually agree with those who sort of say he avoided the draft, he was a card and so on. I think if he avoided it genuinely on grounds of principle, that is something to be admired. But again, there's hypocrisy in that because he was going from a pacifist position, at least that's what he said, and yet he had no problem supporting the militant Black Panthers at home, who were prepared to use violence. Now, again, people will give me a history lesson on why Black Power was needed and all the rest of it, but I still contend that Ali, after his friend Malcolm X was assassinated, he should have really woken up to how dangerous the Nation of Islam was, but he didn't distance himself for until years afterwards. Um, so for all those reasons, I just don't think that there's much objectivity when it comes to analysis of Muhammad Ali, and this is something that just seems to be predictable on every Ali video. And if anyone says these things, they're immediately denounced as a racist, they're immediately denounced as stupid, they're immediately denounced as not a real boxing fan, etc., etc. I give Ali credit for popularizing the heavyweight division. There's no question about it. His fights were exciting. Um, and he does deserve some credit for some of the way he hyped up the fights. Not talking about where he crossed the line, but in other respects. Um, he also, I don't need to mention his athletic ability, that's obvious. Um, he was witty, no question about that. That's certainly something that can be admired. He fought as fast as he fought, you know, um, and he was probably an iconic cultural figure. But when assessments of Ali are made, I just hope they are for it, and I hope the obituaries to him. I don't want to be morbid with this. I'm just being realistic. I hope they are not groveling. That is in Ring Magazine and so on. I hope they're not just blindly adulating. I hope the editor will have the courage at that time to give a fair assessment and not just blindly adulate the man. Um, Now, to be fair, in the previous few decades, he has been a much more unifying figure. So that is the caveat to all of my criticism. He has, I would say, he's a much better person in the last 2 or 3 decades than he was at the time he was making those very contentious comments. And it wasn't even like a spur of the moment thing. It never was with Ali. He knew full well what he was saying. Um, that wasn't particularly intelligent. It was witty, some witticisms he made. But his views on race, I don't think you can justify them. His opposition to, the thing is, you can think it's a standing up to the white establishment, but it could be argued that was just as much an insult to black people. For example, black people who were in mixed relations. I mean, what right does Ali to have to say to a black woman that she has no right to be with a white man? Um, he's got no right at all. Again, if I find any sort of evidence that he's retracted any of this stuff or come back on it, then I'll say, okay, fair play to him. But I haven't seen that. As far as I know, he's never retracted any of this stuff. And that's the way it is. Coming! So, you could say he's principled. I'll give him that. That's another area where I give Ali credit. He he's not politically correct. He's principled. But let's just stop deluding ourselves that he is a living deity, because he's not. And there's many, many areas I feel he could be criticized on. I mean, in his lifetime. So that's Muhammad Ali. Certainly an incredible person. In terms of his athletic appeal, in terms of his influence on sport and so on. And yes, I concede he is a major, major cultural figure, but he is not. He is not above reproach. Let's just get away from this pathetic idea that he is.